Welcome to today's Software Security Gurus webcast. With me today, Brian Levine. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Matias. Glad to be here.
Thank you. No, thanks for accepting. Hey, Brian, do you mind sharing a few words about yourself?
Sure, be happy to. Yeah, thanks for inviting me on. Just kind of a few words about myself. Currently, I'm leading product security and cloud security for practices at Axway. My responsibilities cover sort of the full breadth of secure software development lifecycle, SDLC, and also I have responsibility for cloud security operations and cloud security architecture. For those that may have never heard of Axway, we're an enterprise software security or software provider, and I manage the security. But we're an enterprise software provider to government agencies, large enterprises, banks, financial institutions, you name it, kind of the Fortune 500. And we've been recognized by Gartner and other analysts for our API gateway and cloud services. That's just kind of a little bit aside about Axway. But kind of my background, how I got into security, sort of in my younger days, I was kind of always just sort of approached things from a hacker mindset. And I'd say that's kind of how I got into security, is from that hacker's perspective. So at a younger age, I was playing with a lot of different emerging technologies, in my youth. Don't want to date myself too much, but when modems first started coming on the market, we had a lot of fun doing things with war dialing and finding telnet systems and logging in and seeing what we could do, and had a lot of fun with that in the early days of the internet and PC era. Really just kind of seeing what happens if I crash this game or circumvent the copy protection controls, privacy controls on this cool game I want to play. And then on the professional side, I've worn a lot of hats, the customer facing roles, done the technical sales engineering. That led me to a security product management role, and that led me into the more full-time InfoSec, AppSec, the core roles that I'm in right now. And just love to have the opportunity to connect and learn from other people. Thrilled by the challenges and learning something new, every single day, and just love to meet up with others and share experiences, compare notes, and seeing what we're seeing that works and seeing what doesn't work.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for this lovely introduction. And I think we all have similar backgrounds where we start off, breaking things, hacking things, experimenting with things. And then ultimately we decide like, gee, can we make it better? And that's how we roll into what we're doing today, I think, to make the world a better place. And to actually what sparked this conversation is a talk that you gave at OWASP Global AppSec 2020. And the title of that talk was A Warrior's Journey Building a Global AppSec Program. I was very fascinated by that presentation because the thinking is very much aligned with how we would approach security and how we would roll out security. So I would love to have a chat around the three topics that you describe in that particular talk, which is around culture, process, and governance. So I would say let's start with culture. Security is everybody's job, and you refer to BSIM, the Software Security Group. You refer to OpenSAM, the Software Security Center of Excellence. You refer to the Product Security Group. But how do you get started with something like that?
Yeah, great. I'm glad you enjoyed the talk. So we've all heard that phrase, probably, security is everyone's job. And those of us who, it's our role, we put that slogan maybe in front of the organization, say, hey, security is everyone's. But really, how do you make that reality? Because not everyone can do security every day. They have another job. So how do we get a security culture going so that people know what their security role is and that they are executing their responsibility around security, as well as what their primary jobs may be, developer, operations manager, product manager, engineering manager. So there's a lot of interest out there, and when you're starting off, it's like, okay, where do I start? There's OpenSAM, there's BSIM, there's Microsoft SDL, there's the CSF. So it's really just kind of so many different frameworks. But what's interesting and what I've found is kind of taking the commonalities of these frameworks and also just kind of, what's kind of worked out for us in our personal experience. So I think, the first thing is really you have to build that core software security group. And, without this central organization to at least set some ground rules and set some objectives and kind of set the charter, you're not going to get very far. So defining that team and defining your software security group, your central team, and how do you do that? Well, the first thing, you got to get executive sponsorship. So you really want to make sure, and this depends on what level of the organization you're working in. Obviously, you need your direct manager's approval and sponsorship, but it's the highest level of the organization and the highest level of the business units that you're going to be working with. So if I'm working with operations, then I need the operations executive responsible, the operations manager responsible agreeing with this program and agreeing to our charter as well. If you can get the CEO sponsorship and the CEO awareness and the CEO to write a nice letter or email about your program, that's what you need. And so how do you do that? Well, this could start with a semi-formal presentation, a proposal, some socialization. You set up some one-on-ones with a different line of business owners. And then once you have the kind of socialized alignment, then you're ready to launch and kind of formally announce the program. And so you really want to make it formal. You want to have a charter that's published. It could be in a policy. It could be, part of your broader. You might have an ISO governance policy. You can include it into your ISO information security policies. But the important thing is that it's, it's published, and everyone, all the stakeholders agree to it. This is what we're going to do. And then part of that, you really have to break down the responsibilities. So everyone's kind of favorite word, the RACI matrix, right? What are the responsibilities and roles within the policy or within the charter, right? Who's going to do what? What's the software security group responsible for? What are the engineers responsible for? What are your lines of business responsible for? And because it's a shared responsibility model, so having that RACI as part of it is key to getting that sponsorship, that buy-in, and the establishment of your charter. One other interesting data point when you're starting out, I would say, is the size and the scale and the scope. And so you have to take a look at your organization and say, okay, well, how many developers do we have in our company? If you look at, BSIM, they have some really interesting data, and some other, groups and studies have looked at the data and said about 1% to 3% of your, engineering or your operations should be full-time security engineers. So, if you do the math, it's about, the 3% range. You want at least one full-time application security engineer to about 20 to 30 developers or 20 to 30 people that you're serving.
That's a good ratio. If you can get that, that's a good ratio. 1 in 30.
You're doing pretty good.
Then you didn't do pretty good. There's not a lot of people in that position.
And it depends, like I said, on the scale of the organization. If you're 100 developers, okay, maybe you can get by with a lower end of the ratio. But if you have 3,000 developers in your organization, you're probably going to be on the higher end of that ratio.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. It depends kind of statistic.
Absolutely. So first of all, I couldn't agree more. I think it's top to bottom. If you have executive sponsorship, that's the only way to get started with a program like that. Build a really good core and then break it out and make sure you have some champions in these groups. How do you find these champions? Like, how do you bridge from growing to a central piece to something that the entire organization rallies around it? Because if it stays central, it's not going to work either.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's about the scale of the team and the scale of the organization, because at some point, you can't have your core security team. I've got 3 application security experts and 50 different R&D teams. I'm not going to be in every single Scrum. I'm not going to be able to be in every single meeting. And my team, your core security team, won't know the intricate details of each engineering project and each environment. And so that's really where the security champions fit in. and why you need the Security Champions program. And so when you're selecting security champions, it's best to have team members that are volunteering versus voluntold.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you get a better mileage. You want to identify the individuals who either they're coming to you directly and saying, hey, I want to join your team. How do I do that? And you can say, well, you don't have to join my team to do security. Here's how, and here's what make you a security champion. As well, they may have already demonstrated expertise within their products and within their development project. To say maybe they brought in a security tool, maybe they identified a number of security issues, security risks that the rest of the team hadn't considered. Those are your good candidates to be champions. As well, if you have a training program, the folks that are always first to complete the training, getting the highest scores in the training, asking what's next. Those are, again, great candidates to align with and bring into the champions program.
Absolutely. And I think it takes more than only having technical skills for the security champions. It starts with having technical skills. If that's not there, it's not going to work. But if they have the technical skills, they also have to have a little bit of social skills and be able to persuade other people and help other people in moving that forward.
Yeah, I could definitely agree with that point. And yes, I think that may even be more important, is you have to have that social skills to be able to persuade and to show up and not be disruptive and collaborate with the rest of the development team, because obviously everyone has competing priorities, and selling security is definitely a social skill.
Yeah. Let's switch topics. Let's go to process. We know we have the Microsoft SSDLC, we have the digital touch points. There's plenty of stuff out there. Every company has its own version, which is good because every company is unique. But they quite often all do a little bit of the same things. And one thing that you described is, hey, you have to identify gates, you have to collect results, do not enforce them. Can you give a little bit more color on how you approach these gates? What are good gates? A little bit more around the SDLC and how to weave in security activities.
Yeah, and it's a great point to start with too, is that if you're just starting out, if you're just implementing a program, you don't want to show up and say, okay, you failed some security tests, so therefore the project is blocked. Right? You need to, the first thing you do is just start observing, start measuring, start testing, and view the result, but you don't really enforce a hard gate. You don't enforce a block if you're just starting out, because when you start using security tools, you're going to get a lot of new data that no one's seen before. You might have a lot of false positives, and there's a lot of tuning that goes on there. And so that's definitely a key, is that whatever the gate is, just start out observing and start out measuring and building that awareness, so people say, okay, now I understand what this is doing and what we need to be knowing about. But an example of a gate, and when you talk about the SDLC and the process, a simple example would be, for example, you have an ISR initial security review meeting with a team, and you have maybe a checklist there, and you say, okay, one checklist item might be, does your product have an API? If it's yes, okay, yes, your product has an API. Okay, now we have a gate that says your API must be scanned using a DAST tool, using a security scanner, and the result must show that there's no critical highs or mediums before you release your products. And so that would be just one example of a security gate.
Sure. And so how do you do that continuously? That's another question. Like, a lot of people say, you know what, we need to do DevOps and everything goes continuously, and we do it quite often. How do you approach something like that? Because the models that we've just described, the digital touch points or the Microsoft SSDLC, they're fairly old. Everything that's 10 plus years old is fairly old in our industry. So how do we do that in the new world?
Yeah, exactly. And kind of up to the starting point as well, in terms of, leveling up and building that organization and building that team. So to have security at scale, to have continuous security and working within a development organization and the development culture, the number one thing is you want to make the developer's job as easy as possible, as frictionless as possible. And so when you're scaling up, really you have to maintain that customer focus and remember who is your customer. It's the developer, it's the person that is responsible to do security, but it's not their full-time job. And so that's your customer. And how do you make their job easier? And so really the culture and the process is, okay, it's I allow you to do it self-service. It's not I do it for you, but I'm going to give you the automation. I'm going to give you the tools. I'm going to give you the training to integrate it right into your pipeline, to integrate it right into your build. And so I have, what we do for CI/CD and continuous security, we have pipelines defined and automation defined to say, okay, like the example I gave, okay, you have to run a DAST scan. Okay, well, I have a hook that I can put into my Jenkins pipeline or whatever I'm using as my build automation. I have a hook that will trigger that scan, and then I have an API to feed the results of that scan back into either a dashboard or directly back into Jenkins to say, okay, did it pass or it failed? If it passed, then we just move forward and the build moves forward. If it failed, then okay, now we can block the build and somebody has to do something. But the great thing about that approach is that it doesn't require going to a different tool, logging into a different dashboard, looking at some other third-party thing. It's putting the data right there in the pipeline where the developer works every day in their common set of tools with that automation. And so, really, like you said, it's DevOps and DevOps continuous security scale. We're building multiple times a day. We're releasing multiple times a day. We don't have this time to do the classic sort of waterfall, SDL. If you have 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 4 months for a software project, great. Okay, you can do that sort of linear SDL, but like you said, in the DevOps continuous world, that doesn't adopt itself too well. And so when you have these automation and the frameworks, that's what enables the continuous security. And yeah, I could talk a lot more and give some more examples about that, but that's sort of a high level intro of how we do it.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think we have to do it in a continuous fashion, and we have to interact over there. And essentially, the developer already has an environment. He has a computer with IntelliJ, and he's working with particular systems. It's not a good idea to add more systems to it, for security reasons. Let's just go there where he is and integrate our solutions where he is, and make it as frictionless as possible.
I will add that one of the critical hurdles that people have to get over when they talk about, because when people say, oh, you're going to run the security scan in the build, they get scared because they want their build to run in 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes. If you tell them, oh, you got to run the security tool and it's going to take an hour, okay, that doesn't work for us because we need it. So the hurdle that people have to get over is some of your security tooling can be automated inline, and it will run quickly and it can be run in line with your build. Other jobs that may take hours, days, what have you, those can be run out of band, but you still can have an API that gives the results to that job every time that job runs. So I ran the scan yesterday out of band. I can still poll and find out, okay, did it pass or fail? And every 20 jobs I run today, as long as it passed last night, then my jobs today still pass. And so that's one of the nuances that I think some people get hung up on when they're trying to do the security scanning and the security tooling directly in the build and maintain that speed and cycle time that that the developers want to have.
Yeah, I love that. And some people refer to that as the coffee test. You know, you need to cram as many tests as possible in the time you can actually go for a coffee and come back. And if it doesn't fit into that coffee test, you have to actually externalize it or parallelize it. So exactly right. So
Yeah,
love that example.
I'll start using the coffee test as well.
And last topic that you talked about was governance, KPIs and dashboards. And I have to be honest, I've seen multiple KPIs, dashboards. They all kind of look the same, but again, they're all different as well. Nobody's, by the way, using one single tool for that. Everybody built its own dashboard. So would love to hear your take on KPIs and dashboards, and especially around what do you think are good ones, what are bad ones, what are your opinions on that?
Yeah, yeah, I can understand too what you mean too, and especially when you look at every vendor that comes in and they have a tool and hey, we have a dashboard and we do correlation, etc. So it's a really interesting subject, and I haven't found, say, a good sort of neutral take from like a BSIM or OWASP SAM or others that says, okay, these are the metrics to use. I think there's a lot of thought out there from other organizations, but what we use, couple that we use, one that I found that is very interesting, it's really high fidelity, is the number of customer or third-party reported issues in a product or in a service. And I like it because it's very high fidelity. It's hard to you can't do that, right? It's like, here's somebody that had a problem with the product, they reported it to you, you acknowledged it was an issue, and you fixed. So it kind of cuts through a lot of engineering of false positive, that's not an issue, and so the tooling, they can raise those issues. So I like that because it's a single kind of KPI that we can look at, quantify, and it cuts through a lot of the noise, and it's high fidelity. And so obviously we want to see that trend always going in the downward direction, and we want to be minimizing and finding and fixing things before they release and before they launch, before a third-party pen tester gets a hold of it and reports something. And so that one I found to be useful for us. Internally, when we're doing those tests, really what we want to look at is more of a risk aggregation. So it's easy to run one tool, one scan, and get a result from that one tool or one scan. But what is the aggregation of all of the tools that you're using? And then look at, of course, the classic, critical, the number of criticals, number of mediums, number of highs, etc. But also really you want to look at what's the time horizon on that. What is the real delta look like over time? Obviously, we want to see security debt going down over time, and that's the metric and the KPI we'll look at and say, okay, over time, is it going increasing debt or decreasing debt? And that's something we sort of share, we surface, and back to the executive sponsorship and back to the security culture, and putting that somewhere that's visible, that teams can see how they stack up, how's their product performing versus their peers. So those are definitely human motivators, and creates a little friendly competition as well within the groups.
Yeah, security, one of the few departments in an organization where managers like the graph to see go down. Normally, they always like it to see go up, but in terms of risk and vulnerabilities, they like it to see go down. Yeah. Brian, maybe a last question. If my sources are correct, you are a jiu-jitsu champion, if my sources are correct. What belt are you, and does it rank higher or lower than your AppSec belt?
Oh, great trick question. So yeah, I practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm a brown belt today, okay. So I haven't quite got to that black belt level yet. The nice thing about Jiu-Jitsu is it's definitely a journey that it takes some time to get to that black belt level, but hopefully it's still a goal of mine to get there. And so I'm going to have to go with I'm a higher belt in application security. I feel like I could keep that black belt rank, I think, and maybe hopefully a few stripes on that belt. But I wouldn't want to face a brown belt, my peer brown belt in a competition over. I'd rather fight in jujitsu than fight in application security.
Very nice, very nice. Keep up the good work. Brian, thank you very, very much for accepting to be the 21st guru on the Software Security Gurus webcast. It was a fantastic chat. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matias. I appreciate it as well. Always happy to connect and share notes. If like folks would like to discuss more, I'm always keen to have a chat.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.